Thank you very much, Matt. Wonderful to see you all, or to be with you all this evening. As it says on the slide here, the presentation that we're going to have a discussion around tonight is After Further Sightings of the Heffalump, which is one of the papers that I'm just going to bring to the fore to have a little bit of a discussion around. I'm very pleased to be an entrepreneur in residence at the RAU, and I think this gives me quite interesting, this presentation will give me an interesting opportunity to explore a practice-led discussion around what it means to be an entrepreneur. So it's more around the exploration of the topic rather than the theoretical perspective, but it's framed in a theory world, if you like. The reason for this presentation, the reason why this was written, because I have delivered it before, was because I've grappled with the challenge of answering the question, are you an entrepreneur? Found it really quite complex to answer such a simple question. So we'll explore it in a little bit more detail, and hopefully there'll be some information in here that you'll find useful. I do hope so. So before we go on to the presentation, so who am I? Well, as you can see, my name is Nigel Stone, as well as being an entrepreneur in residence at the RAU. I also lead the mentoring program for entrepreneurs at the University West of England. I exited a business that I built and had run for the last 20 years. Just last year, from a management buyout, I grew a sales promotion, what we would class as a field marketing sales promotion agency here that worked with some of the world's best brands like Sony, TomTom, GSK, EE, from a seed fund of £25,000 initial investment to 15 million a year, employing 300 plus staff, plus about 200 freelance staff. We developed offices in both the UK and a network throughout Europe, opened up offices in Germany, and I bear all the scars from that journey. It was a wonderful experience, to be absolutely fair, but there's a lot of learning associated with growing a business. I was just discussing with Matt that previously that I'd part of the funding for the first round came from family, which was an interesting characteristic of building a business and where you get your funding from. And I think my experience and my scars associated with that developed me into the person that I am today. And now my time is spent working with entrepreneurs from around the world. I'm currently working with about 10 or 12, nearly 12 entrepreneurs, 2 in Malaysia, Indonesia, some in Germany, as well, and the rest in the UK. And they vary from everything from testing signal quality, drones, through to soil sampling and to advertising agencies. So it gives you a bit of a feel of who and what I am. So that gives you a bit of a feel of who I am. That gives you a bit of an overview. Let's get on with the discussions and an exploration of what it means to be an entrepreneur. So I'd like to take this from the perspective of being practice-led. I'm a big fan of learning by experience, and I think it's important that, especially with entrepreneurship, that you experience what's happening. You learn firsthand what's happening in the world and what's happening around you, and the influences which are being placed on you and you place on yourself. And experiential learning is really useful for that. So part of this presentation is just going to be, if you can think of it from, okay, this isn't directly about theory, but all these inform this practice-led approach. So first, let's start off with what is entrepreneurship. Well, let me just close the screen. Thank you. So there's the one thing that's for sure is that there's no clear definition of what is entrepreneurship. And I think it was Churchill and Lewis said that basically it's a moving feast. There's no definitive, and it's likely to change even if you do try and staple it down. It's a moving feast. But to give you a sort of a feel, the literature suggests that it can be multi-dimensional concept that includes owning a small business, being innovative, acting as a leader, and starting a new company. So that's quite a broad, generic type term, and that's one that you would probably read in quite a lot of literature. And that's something that I used, I remember back in my, when I did my master's in entrepreneurship. Moving on to more current thinking, if you like, the entrepreneurship architecture can be integrated into any organization of any size, which is an interesting characteristic, to make an organization that exhibits entrepreneurial traits such as innovation and taking risks. So more recent views there, the likes of Steve Blank, thinking in terms of actually it doesn't matter what size organization it is, as long as it's exhibiting this entrepreneurial traits such as innovation and taking risks, then actually it could be any size of corporation. And there's quite a lot in the literature around organizations like Nintendo and Lego being concerned or being considered entrepreneurial because of the way in which they build and they develop, and they're constantly innovating. And then more recent, what I've neglected to say early on, I'm doing a doctorate, which I'm looking to explore how coaches and mentors can work better with entrepreneurs. And this presented itself, this statement from Entrecomp, during my literature review, which shows a slight change in where we are today, is that entrepreneurship is when you act upon opportunities and ideas and transform them into value for others. The theory of value coming through is really quite strong now. The value that is created can be financial, cultural, or social. I think these are really interesting themes now. We're starting to see this social element be more prevalent. And also the likes of charitable, being entrepreneur within the charity sector. These are things which are becoming really quite strong within the themes of the literature that I'm seeing. So the world's changing a little bit, and how we define entrepreneurship is changing. But because we've got these different views, it's difficult to sort of pin it down, but that gives you a sort of a flavour of what I'm seeing within the literature. So what does that mean in terms of sort of 20th century understanding? I really love this slide, because this spoke to me when I first started to look at what it meant to be an entrepreneur, and trying to make sense of what this is, this strange world in which we occupy. So these two perspectives, Joseph Schumpeter, so an entrepreneur is a special type of person in terms of his conduct. Doing something different and new or carrying out innovations involves high levels of uncertainty, as the decisions to be made do not rely on ordinary routines based on widespread knowledge and habits. So Schumpeter, I like a lot of the work that I've read of Schumpeter. I like his view on the world and what entrepreneurship is and being an entrepreneur. For me, this is close to new innovation. I think, if I'm right, that the idea of creative destruction was one of Schumpeter's ideas, and it basically said for any company or for any country, any capitalism market to grow, you're going to have decline at exactly the same time. For every new innovation, there's probably somebody shutting their doors because of an impact of that. Now, I love that sort of perspective, that there's this constant evolution that's happening all the time. We're feeding in and things are growing and then they're dying, and that's part of the natural order of things. Whereas the Kerzner type of view is slightly different. The Kerzner entrepreneur is someone who is alert to profitable opportunities for exchange, acting as an intermediary, discovering profit opportunities, and came up with this concept of alertness and grasping pure profit. So looking at perhaps from a slightly different angle, that the market isn't functioning correctly, it's not firing on all cylinders, and because that's the case, it's not giving the benefit to the customers, which is allowing a new opportunity. I saw a really nice case study once upon a time, which was talking about the decline of vinyl records and the replacement with CD-ROMs, and looking at it from the perspective that there wasn't anything wrong with vinyl. It was absolutely fine, but actually it wasn't fitting the market need. So CD-ROMs came along, and that was what replaced it, because the market wasn't quite right. And then after that, along came MP3, etc. And that's not quite right. So something else will come along. So it's suggesting that there's a market function that isn't operating properly. I think another interesting aspect to do with the Kerzner approach is the looking for opportunities that might be iterative in process, and it's the way I view it. I'm sure there's people on here on this discussion that equally is knowledgeable, if not more, than I am on this subject. I'm be happy to put right, but the way I view it is that there's the Kerzner view, the idea of finding opportunities that are iterative. I can do something slightly better than the competition, and by doing it slightly better, I improve, and I take a bit more market share. And there's some interesting YouTube videos out there around the subject and this subject, and saying, well, actually, is it really Schumpeter type market, which is boom and bust, or is it not really an iterative process where, yeah, okay, compass over we could take, for example, the satellite navigation market, TomTom and Garmin. I was working with TomTom at the time when they were under immense pressure from Garmin with price cutting, etc. And the inevitability of the market's going to move to sat navs being in cars anyway at one time or another. But there was this over pressure of them iteratively increasing and improving their proposition very slightly in order to retain or gain market share. So the actual movement in market share was never huge. So there's this idea of innovation attached to the sort of Kerznian entrepreneur. So I hope that it works really for me. That sort of, those examples give me two tracks of mind. So just moving on to sort of defining what is an entrepreneur, and then I'll define what an entrepreneur is to me, and then we can have a look at the further sightings of the Heffalump sort of idea. So an entrepreneur, so Hirschrich, someone who demonstrates initiative and creative thinking, is able to organize the social and economic mechanisms to turn resources and situations to practical account and accept risk and failure. So there's some points here that I'm going to come back to in a moment when we go to a couple slides forward. That's the prominent theme of accepts risk and failure. I've got quite dominant themes, but we'll come back to that. A person who habitually creates and innovates to build something of recognized value around perceived opportunities. I personally like that, because I think we're coming from that point of view again, that value is important, that this is what we're actually all about. It's more about value. And then we've got Oliveri, which is an interaction between skill and motivation, and then set them into motion. I think that last bit means so much when you're working with entrepreneurs. You can plan all day, every day. The bit that really makes a difference is when you start doing something which which you actually execute, you get on and you move forward with it. That's a key indicator to me of entrepreneurial intent, and that's the entrepreneurial spirit. So what does it mean for me though? So I said it was going to be practice led. So if this is me. This is, if I was looking at why did I start my business back in 1999 after working in retail for quite a long time? Well, I had the dream. So entrepreneurs have a dream and share a will to conquer. Absolutely, I wanted to be number one in the marketplace. That didn't actually happen. I got to number 4, but didn't actually get to number 1. An impulse to fight and prove themselves superior to others. Absolutely, on the day of me leaving my business. Me leaving my job, my boss said to me, good luck with your business and I'll see you in 6 months when it all goes horribly wrong. That was red rag to the bull for me. So that definitely resonates to me. To succeed for the sake of success rather than from economic reward. Oh, absolutely. Money has never been a driver for me. It's always been around doing the right thing, building strong relationships, getting the solution right that meets the customer's needs, getting all the ticks and all the boxes, and then the money comes on the back of that if you're doing everything right. They share the joy of creating and getting things done. Absolutely, I had one of the best management teams, certainly in the industry sector that I was in, and that's why we grew so quickly, doubling year on year with minimal investment for the first 5 years. It was just really clear that we were going to be successful. The entrepreneur seeks out difficulties and challenges, finding delight in the venture itself. Absolutely, we looked for the competitive advantage in the marketplace, which was at that time, 1999, bearing in mind that you've only just started introducing text messaging. We were starting to capture data on PDA devices, and then we were running that data, analyzing that data, and turning reports around for clients that would take them 2.5, 3 weeks. We were doing in 2 days. Hence our growth within the marketplace. So for me, Schumpeter, that fits really well, but I appreciate that that's not what it means to every entrepreneur out there. So we can see from the discussions around entrepreneurship and definitions of entrepreneur, there is no one clear definition that resonates, and that's really firm and clear indicators that are coming from the literature in terms of that. So I think there's something in there about finding what it means to you, what those elements mean to you, and what that's actually, what that sort of all fits together, and you're comfortable with that sort of appreciation of what that term is. Sorry, I hope that's clear. So let's have a look at the further sightings of the Heffalump in Chad Perry's 1990 sort of findings. He conducted some research based on Kilby's 1971 meta-analysis. He looked to refresh what was going on, what the research had been done previously. And what he did was he looked at the differences between entrepreneur, business managers and the general public, and looked at, can we identify from a meta-analysis, is there traits or is there themes which can come through which would indicate what it is to be an entrepreneur? By perhaps today's standards, it's quite superficial, it's quite high level, but I find it quite useful, and it's a really nice place to start when you're starting to look at, okay, how do you define what it is to be an entrepreneur? So let's just run through. So this is a really simple slide, but it will give you a feel for this, and sort of an idea of what this paper was trying to, or what it achieved at the end of it. So do we think that entrepreneurs and the general public were achievement orientated? Absolutely. Yes, it was seen, the research suggested that yes, they were achievement orientated, they looked to achieve goals, etc., but actually no more than what an average manager might look to do within it, or a good manager within a good business would do. So comparing it to the general public, yeah, okay, but actually not much difference from a general run-of-the-mill manager. Would they, in terms of independence, do they look to be an entrepreneur because I want to be independent, I don't want to work for anybody else, etc.? Well, the findings were quite inconclusive between either that of the general public or that of business managers, excuse me. It was inconclusive, so there was no definitive as whether that was the case. And there's quite some interesting sort of discussion in and around, and my personal practice-led view is even if you are an entrepreneur and you're running your business and you're a one-man band, you've always got a customer. So you're always subservient to somebody in some way, shape or form. So the thought of independence, I think, is something that's probably a bit futile. But the ability for you to be able to define your own direction and go where you want to go is something very different to having independence. I guess you could frame that in terms of you controlling your own diary. Absolutely, you can do that. Obviously being an entrepreneur, because it's your world, it's your life, you do what's important to you. But ultimately, you've still got somebody who's paying the bills, which is likely to be the customer. So that was inconclusive. The internal locus of control being your ability to be in control of your own world around you, as opposed to the world exerting its influences over you. So this view that actually I can do this because I'm in control of this, I know what I'm going to do, I'm going to take all the elements associated with this, I'm going to make it happen. Yeah, absolutely, was associated with being entrepreneurial or being an entrepreneur, and it was associated also with managers, but less so with the sort of general public type view. Internal locus of control, closely akin to sort of self-efficacy type view, considered very important. Propensity or risk-taking propensity. This is interesting because risk-taking propensity is what a lot of the literature used to say was the case, that actually, yeah, no problem, I can take that risk, and the propensity to take risks suggests that you're going to take risk at any cost. actually, I'm happy to take this risk because I'm confident in my own ability. My internal locus of control is firing on all cylinders. I'm good for this. So this was interesting that this came out as not being the case. However, what did come out as being the case was that they did have risk perception, which was suggesting that there's this view that there's you can look at the world and you can take an educated risk assessment of that, and then your perception of that risk will then allow you to make the decision that you think is appropriate. But that was really quite interesting there. So not so much the propensity to risk, but more so the risk perception. So cognitive styles, the way in which they think, this open personal values, meaning the likes of looking for opportunities, openness, the dogma type view, that yes, they saw that as traits with within an entrepreneur. And likewise within interpersonal values, sort of the supportive nature of us looking and working with people. So it's quite interesting that this research started to look at cognitive with a way of sort of differentiating what might be an entrepreneur from that of general managers. So what is really interesting is that within this whole sort of context of this discussion is that there are some things there which you just say, yeah, I get those, and the managers, yeah, I get the managers. I can see that a manager would have that same. A good manager would be achievement driven. A good manager would have a good internal locus of control, etc. And probably be the same in terms of personal values and interpersonal values. They've got to be good at all these things because these are not unique characteristics of an entrepreneur. So what was really interesting was the idea of the high growth entrepreneur activity. So what came out of this research was this perception that we can differentiate high growth entrepreneurs from that of entrepreneurs as a standard theme. So business managers, so if we take Schumpeter's view on a business manager being a pizza shop owner who just delivers standard run-of-the-mill type pizza. An entrepreneur needs something that does it in a really sexy way, delivers it by drones, or does something which is unique with the formula and delivers it in a different way, etc. And then you've got this new group called the high growth entrepreneur, suggesting that these are people which are massively achievement orientated. And what it suggested here is that the definition of this group also indicated that the need for high level of independence, high internal locus of control, more significant cognitive styles, but actually a lower propensity to risk. So this is quite interesting here. So we've gone back from this it sort of supports this low level risk view, but actually it's not suggesting that they've just got a lesser or stronger risk perception. They've actually got a lower propensity to risk. So you've now got multiple categories. We've got the general public, we've got business managers, we've got entrepreneurs, and then we've got this high growth. And what it was suggesting as well in terms of this output was that the way we educate entrepreneurs and business managers, although the business managers and the entrepreneurs look very similar on many scales, but are different from that of high growth entrepreneurs. Perhaps what we should do is we should train them in different ways. Even though business managers and entrepreneurs have similar traits, they need to be trained in different ways in order to get the best out of them. And some of the characteristics that we see in high growth should be used as part of the training development for the entrepreneur. So hopefully that makes sense. So what we have is these multiple categories. So it's not just about entrepreneur and business manager, actually about high growth. And I guess you could say the likes of Steve Jobs, etc., are these type of high growth, significant entrepreneurs which are forging the way forward. So just to look at some of the idea of other suggested traits and characteristics that you'll find within the literature. So personality key traits, or key characteristics, achievement orientated and motivated. We've seen that within the Perry research. Propensity to risk, calculated risk taker, that's still very evident. High internal locus of control is there. Key authors like Deakins and Friel, Karatko and Hodgetts and Burns, all suggesting that these are real evidence, although there's evidence of these being in situ when entrepreneurs are working. Creativity, innovation, need for autonomy. I particularly like this one, ambiguity of tolerance. So how comfortable are you in an environment where you don't know what's going on, and the ability to drive yourself forward where you don't know, I think is really an interesting concept. Vision, being able to see where you want to go and how you're going to get there. Self-efficacy, proactive and decisive and opportunistic. One other aspect that came out that was really quite interesting in the literature was Bourne et al. Found that 5 different domains of variables predicted venture growth. So personality traits of the entrepreneur, situational, specific motivation. So we know this. We know that if you set yourself goals and you sign to them in blood, and you have a clear vision and dream of what you want to achieve, that you're more likely to achieve that. You have the skills, the business strategies, and an influence with environmental factors. And these are things that, so environmental factors, you could say this could be luck, but actually in reality, well, I can go back to when I started my business. 2 months in of me starting my business, one of my competitors went under and I picked up 3 of their clients. So that could be luck, or that could be environmental factors. I had to identify who those clients were that they had, and were then looking for new vendors, new suppliers, and then approach them to get in. So actually, was it luck? Was it environmental factors? Definitely. Was it me making my own luck? And is that a characteristic then of being an entrepreneur? I don't know. But these are all here, and they're all evident in sort of my practice-led view of the world. So just to finish off on this sort of cognitive bias, and we can get to some questions and answers. So there was some interesting work that's been done by HAT 2019. It's just this research has just come out. So this shift in entrepreneurial understanding, that this is concerned with that. So, let me start at the beginning. Entrepreneurs may best be distinguished from non-entrepreneurs according to their cognitive tendencies, by Shaver and Scott. So this was then amplified and worked with the likes of HAT, which is this concerned with how people think, perceptions, memory, and mental processes, and the way they think influences their behaviors. So thinking of this and this idea of heuristic shortcuts, these mental shortcuts that we have, perhaps this is what differentiates an entrepreneur from a manager. And perhaps these tendencies, what we've got to be careful is that we don't overdo these tendencies, and some things to be aware of, things like optimism, a tendency to seize opportunities despite uncertainty about the outcome. Is that something that entrepreneurs have more of a propensity towards? I'm not sure. For me, it was absolutely the case. Always quoted as being glass half full, not glass half empty. Willingness to generalize based on small samples, a tendency to take a big decision despite a lack of available information. I think that's really key. That's certainly been part of my decision-making process. Be first to market with a limited amount of information, and execute quickly and to high quality. There's a contradiction in terms there, because it's sometimes you could say, well, actually 6 months in, you'd have a better quality product if you waited. But being first to market was always really important. That's interesting, but yeah, it was definitely a driver for me. Intuition, a reluctance to collect information, to support decisions, rather going with gut feel and personal beliefs. Yeah, I'm afraid that was pretty much taking the practice-led view. That was very much me as well. So there's this element of saying that I'm driven by making decisions, my ability to also to park bad incidents or things that hadn't gone well and move on really quickly was very evident within my business, and that informed my personal beliefs. So if I got away with it 3 times, then I think I can get away with it the 4th or the 5th time. So there's these biases associated with entrepreneurs, and this is something of the mix as well. These are something that translate into our everyday world in which entrepreneurs live in. When you're trying to make sense of this, of what it is to be an entrepreneur, then I think these are things that you need to think about as well. Exactly the same as when you're doing research. You've got to manage your reflexive approach. This is exactly the same as when you're trying to define what it means for you to be an entrepreneur. So lastly, some good news. The results show that entrepreneurs who attain high levels of education are intrinsically motivated to manage firms that are more likely to introduce innovation. So there's this view that I guess we can look at things from an academic point of view, which allow us to have far greater breadth and depth of information in order to innovate. And it means that those which are associated with academic organizations and developing businesses that are looking to innovate, that we as educators and we as people within education are well placed to work in the future based around these type of principles. So there you go, a list of references for you that's in the presentation of all the quoted papers from the presentation. Other than that, Q&A.